Hi, welcome to TJ Trinity Studios, where we're always plugged into the matrix of entertainment. I am losing my voice a little bit, I think. Hopefully we'll be able to film tomorrow. Anyway, today is story time, and we're gonna read some scary stories from my childhood. Scary Stories 3, More Tales to Chill Your Bones, by Alvin Schwartz. I'm going to read to you about Harold. When it got hot in the valley, speaking of hot, it is hot in here today. Yesterday was too cold, today's too hot. Go figure. Anyway.
It's a wee bit toasty.
When it got hot in the valley, Thomas and Alfred drove their cows up to a cool green pasture in the mountains to graze. Usually they stayed there with the cows for 2 months. Then they brought them down to the valley again. The work was easy enough, but oh, it was boring. All day the two men tended their cows. At night they went back to the tiny hut where they lived. They ate supper and worked in the garden and went to sleep. It was always the same. Then Thomas had an idea that changed everything. "Let's make a doll the size of a man," he said. "It would be fun to make, and we could put it in the garden to scare away the birds." "It should look like Harold," Alfred said. Harold was the farmer they both hated. They made the doll out of old sacks stuffed with straw. They gave it a pointy nose like Harold's and tiny eyes like his. And then they added dark hair and a twisted frown. Of course, they also gave it Harold's name. Each morning on their way to the pasture, they tied... Let's check out this picture. It's so creepy. Look at that.
Why is he doing the splits?
I don't know, but he's creepy. Creepy.
He's getting his morning yoga in, doing his pole splits,
I don't know. Might be.
doing his jumping jacks on the pole.
And they tied Harold to a pole in the garden to scare away the birds. Each night they brought him inside so that he wouldn't get ruined if it rained. When they were feeling playful, they would talk to him. One of them might say, "How are the vegetables growing today, Harold?" Then the other, making believe he was Harold, would answer in a crazy voice, "Very slowly." They both would laugh, but not Harold. Whenever something went wrong, they took it out on Harold. They would curse at him, even kick him or punch him. Sometimes one of them would take the food they were eating, which they both were sick of, and smear it on the doll's face. "How do you like it? How do you like that stew, Harold?" he would ask. "Well, you better eat it or else." Then the two men would howl with laughter. One night after Thomas had wiped Harold's face with food, Harold grunted. "Did you hear that?" Alfred asked. "It was Harold," Thomas said. "I was watching him when it happened. I can't believe it." "How could he grunt?" Alfred asked. "It's just a sack of straw. It's not possible." "Let's throw him in the fire," said Thomas, "and that will be that." "Let's not do anything stupid," said Alfred. "We don't know what's going on. When we move the cows down, we'll leave him behind. For now, let's just keep an eye on him." So they left Harold sitting in the corner of the hut. They didn't talk to him or take him outside anymore. Now and then, the doll grunted. But that was all. After a few days, they decided there was nothing to be afraid of. Maybe a mouse or some insects had gotten inside Harold and were making those noises, those sounds. So Thomas and Alfred went back to their old ways. Each morning they put Harold out in the garden, and each night they brought him back into the hut. When they felt playful, they joked with him. When they felt mean, they treated him as badly as ever. Then one night, Alfred noticed something that frightened him. Harold was growing. "Harold is growing," he said. "I was thinking the same thing," Thomas said. "Maybe it's just our imagination," Alfred replied. "We have been up here on this mountain too long." The next morning, while they were eating, Harold stood up and walked out of the hut. He climbed on the roof and trotted back and forth like a horse on its hind legs. All day and all night he trotted like that. In the morning, Harold climbed down and stood in a far corner of the pasture. The men had no idea what he would do next. They were afraid. They decided to take the cows down into the valley the same day. When they left, Harold was nowhere in sight. They felt as if they had escaped a great danger and began joking and singing. But when they had gone only a mile or two, they realized they had forgotten to bring the milking stools. Neither one wanted to go back for them, but the stools would cost a lot to replace. "There really is nothing to be afraid of," they told one another. "After all, what could a doll do?" They drew straws to see which one would go back. And it was Thomas. "I'll catch up with you," he said, and Alfred walked on toward the valley. When Alfred came to the rise in the path, he looked back for Thomas. He did not see him anywhere, but he did see Harold. The doll was on the roof of the hut again. As Alfred watched, Harold kneeled and stretched out a bloody, dry skin in the sun. Maybe you shouldn't tease your dolls. I used to have a scarecrow that I built. It was quite creepy.
I have a Lego scarecrow. It's the one that fights Batman, but it's still a scarecrow.
I mean, he wasn't as scary as this scarecrow, but he was pretty scary looking. Alright. Let's see what else we got. Let's read Boomin'. Look at that picture. The girl was late getting home for supper. She took a shortcut through the cemetery, but oh, it made her nervous. When she saw another girl ahead of her, she hurried to catch up. "Do you mind if I walk with you?" she asked. "Walking through the cemetery at night scares me." "What do you mean?" the other girl said. "I used to feel the way myself when I was alive. There are all sorts of things that scare us. The dead scare us. For one day we will be dead like they are. The dark scares us, for we don't know what is waiting in the dark. At night the sound of leaves rustling or branches groaning or something whispering makes us uneasy. So do footsteps coming closer. So do strange figures we think we see in the shadows. A human, maybe. A big animal. Or some horrible thing we can barely make out. People call these creatures we think we see Boomin'. We imagine them, they say. But now and then a Boo Man turns out to be real. Queer happenings scare us too. We hear of a boy and a girl who was raised by an animal, a human being us who yelps and howls and runs on all fours. The thought of it makes our flesh crawl. We hear of insects that make their nests in a person's body, or of a nightmare that comes true, and we shudder. If such things really do happen, then they could happen to us. It is from such fears that scary stories grow. This is the third book of such stories I have collected. I learned some of them from people I met. I found others, tales that had been written down in folklore archives and in libraries. As we always do with tales we learn, I have told them in my own way. Some stories in this book have been told only in recent times, but others have been part of our folklore for as long as we know. As one person told another, the details may have changed, but the story itself has not. For what once frightened people still frightens them. I thought at first that one of the stories I found was a modern story. It is one I call The Bus Stop. Then discovered that similar story had been told 2,000 years earlier in ancient Rome, but the young woman involved was named Philonia, not Joanna, as she is in our story. Are the stories in this book true? The one I call The Trouble is true. I can't be sure about the others. Most may have at least a little truth of strange things sometimes happen, and people love to tell about them and turn them into even better stories. Nowadays, most people say that they don't believe in ghosts or queer happenings and such. Yet they still fear the dead in the dark, and they still see boomen waiting in the shadows. And they still tell scary stories just as people always have. Alvin Schwartz. When death arrives. When death arrives, it usually is the end of the story. But in these stories, it's only the beginning. The Appointment. A 16-year-old boy worked on his grandfather's horse farm. One morning he drove a pickup truck into town on an errand. While he was walking along the main street, he saw Death. Death beckoned to him. The boy drove back to the farm as fast as he could, and his grandfather told his grandfather what happened. "Give me the truck," he begged. "I'll go to the city. He'll never find me there." His grandfather gave him the truck, and the boy sped away. After he left, his grandfather went into town looking for Death. When he found him, he asked, "Why did you frighten my grandson that way?" "He is only 16. He is too young to die." "I am sorry about that," said Death. "I did not mean to beckon to him, but I was surprised to see him here. You see, I have an appointment with him this afternoon in the city." Let's read The Bus Stop, and then let's read the one that Alvin said was true. The Trouble. The Bus Stop. Ed Cox was driving home from work in a rainstorm. While he waited for the traffic light to change, he saw a young woman standing alone at a bus stop. She had no umbrella and was soaking wet. "Are you going to Farmington?" he called. "Yes, I am," she said. "Would you like a ride home?" "I would," she said, and she got in. "My name is Joanna Finney. Thank you for rescuing me." "I'm Ed Cox," he said, "and you're welcome." Oh, the way they talked and talked. On the way they talked and talked. She told him about her family and her job and where she had gone to school. And he told her about himself. By the time they had got to her house, the rain had stopped. "I'm glad it rained," Ed said. "Would you like to go out tomorrow after work?" "I'd love to," Joanna said. She asked him to meet her at the bus stop since it was near her office. They had such a good time, they went out many times after that. Always they would meet at the bus stop, and off they would go. Ed liked her more and more each time he saw her, but one night, when they had a date to go out, Joanna did not appear. Ed waited at the bus stop for almost an hour. Maybe something is wrong, he thought, and he drove to her house in Farmington. An older woman came to the door. "I'm Ed Cox," he said. "Maybe Joanna told you about me? I had a date with her tonight. We were supposed to meet at the bus stop near her office, but she didn't show up. Is she all right?" The woman looked at him as if he had said something strange. "I am Joanna's mother," she said slowly. "Joanna isn't here now. But why don't you come in?" Ed pointed to the picture on the mantel. "That looks like her," he said. "It did once," her mother replied, "but that picture was taken when she was your age, about 20 years ago. A few days later, she was waiting in the rain at that bus stop. A car hit her and she was killed." That's sad. Alright, let's find out where the trouble is in here. Mm. 69. Phew. That picture was scary. Forgot how scary these pictures are. What is going on here? When bottles began popping and furniture began flying all over the house. There were many explanations, but none of them was right. Then someone had a scary answer that could involve you. The trouble. Here's the picture. It shows. Kind of creepy. The events of this story took place in 1958 in a small white house in a suburb of New York City. The names of the people involved have been changed. Monday, February 3rd, Tom Lamardo and his sister Nancy had just come home from school. Tom was going on 13, Nancy was 14. They were talking to their mother in the living room when they heard a loud pop in the kitchen. It sounded like a cork had been pulled from a bottle of champagne. But it was nothing like that. The cap of a bottle of starch had somehow come unscrewed and the bottle had tipped over and spilled. Then bottles all over the house began popping. Bottles of nail polish remover, shampoo, bleach, rubbing alcohol, even a bottle of holy water. Each had a screw cap that took 2 to 3 full turns to open, but each had popped by itself, without any human help. Then had fallen over and spilled. "What is going on here?" Miss Lombardo asked. Nobody knew, but the popping soon stopped and everything went back to normal. It was just one of those crazy things, they decided, and put it out of their minds. Hold up! If bottles were popping like crazy in my kitchen, I would not just put that out of my mind. I would be like, alright, it's time to go. Because there is like a spirit in here that is pissed about something. Or just likes to prank people. If there's a spirit that's just wanting to prank you, then it's cool. But if it's one that's trying to hurt you, it's not cool. Anyway, back to the story. Sunday, February 9th. At 11 o'clock that morning, Tom was in the bedroom brushing his teeth. His father was standing in the doorway talking to him. All of a sudden, a bottle of medicine began moving across the vanity by itself and fell into the sink. At the same time, a bottle of shampoo moved to the edge of the vanity and crashed to the floor. They watched, spellbound. "I'd better call the police." Mr. Lombardo said. That afternoon, a patrolman interviewed the family as bottles popped in the bathroom. The police assigned a detective named Joseph Briggs to the case. Detective Briggs was a practical man. When something moved, he believed that a human or an animal had moved it, or that it moved because of vibration or the wind or something natural cause. He did not believe in ghosts. When the Lombardos said they had nothing to do with what was going on, he thought that at least one of them was lying. He wanted to examine the house. Then he wanted to talk to some experts and find out what they thought. Tuesday, February 11th, the bottle of holy water that had opened a week before opened a second time and spilled. 2 days later, it spilled again. Saturday, February 15th, Tom and Nancy and a relative were watching TV in the living room when a small porcelain statue rose up from the table. It flew 3 feet through the air and fell to the rug. Monday, February 17th, a priest blessed the Lombardos' house to protect it against whatever was causing the trouble. Thursday, February 20th, while Tom was doing homework on one end of the dining room table, a sugar bowl at the other end flew into the hall and crashed. Detective Briggs saw it happen. Later, a bottle of ink on the table flew into the wall and broke, shattering in all directions. Then another porcelain statue took off. It traveled 12 feet and smashed into a desk. Friday, February 21st. To get some peace, the Lombardos went to a relative's house for the weekend. While they were gone, everything at home was normal. Sunday, February 23rd, when the Lombardos returned, another sugar bowl took off. It flew into the wall and smashed to smithereens. Later, a heavy bureau in Tom's room toppled over, but no one was in the room when it happened. Monday, February 24th, by now Detective Briggs had talked to an engineer, a chemist, physics, and others. Some thought that the vibrations in the house were causing the trouble. These could come from underground water, they said, and from high-frequency radio waves or from sonic booms caused by airplanes. Others said that the electrical system was the cause of the downdrafts coming through the chimney. The popping of the bottles was blamed on chemicals the bottles contained. Tests showed that there were no vibrations in the house. There was nothing wrong with the electrical system, and there were no chemicals in the bottles that would make them pop. Then what was causing the trouble? None of the experts knew. But every day the Lombardos received dozens of letters, telephone calls from people who thought they did know. Many believed that the house was haunted. They thought that a poltergeist was on the loose. Okay, it goes to this picture.
Weird.
Noisy ghost that is blamed when things move around on their own. No one has proven that poltergeists exist, but people everywhere have told stories about them for hundreds of years, and what they have told was not too different from what was happening to the Lombardos. Detective Briggs did not, of course, believe in poltergeists. He had begun to believe that Tom Lombardo might be to blame. Whenever something happened, Tom was usually in the room or nearby. When he accused Tom of causing the trouble, the boy denied it. "I don't know what's going on," he said. "All I know is that it scares me." People said that Detective Briggs was a tough cop who would turn in his mother if she did something wrong, but he believed Tom. Only now he didn't know what to think. Tuesday, February 25th, a newspaper reporter came to the house to interview the family. Afterward, he sat in the living room by himself, hoping that something would happen and that he could describe in his story. Tom's room was just across the hall from where the reporter sat. The boy had gone to bed, but he had left his door open. Suddenly, a globe of the world flew out of the darkened room and smashed into the wall. The reporter dashed to the bedroom and turned on the light. Tom was sitting in bed, blinking, as if he had just been awakened from a sound sleep. "What was that?" he asked. Wednesday, February 26th. In the morning, a small plastic statue of the Virgin Mary rose up from the dresser in Mr. and Mrs. Lombardo's bedroom and flew into a mirror. That night, while Tom was doing his homework, a 10-pound record player took off from the table, flew 15 feet, then crashed to the floor. February 28th. 2 scientists arrived from Duke University of North Carolina. They were parapsychologists who studied experiences like those of the Lombardos were having. They spent several days talking to the family and examining the house, trying to understand what was going on and what was causing it. One night, a bottle of bleach popped its top, but that was all that happened during their visit. They did not tell the Lombardos about their theory they had that a poltergeist actually might be involved in such cases. According to this idea, poltergeists were not ghosts. They were normal teenagers. They had been so troubled by a problem that their emotions built up into a kind of vibration. Since it was taking place in their unconscious minds, they didn't even know what was happening. But the vibration somehow left their bodies and moved whatever it struck. It happened again and again until a problem had been solved. Scientists had given this strange power a name. They call it psychokinesis. Psychokinesis? The ability to move objects with mental power or mind over matter. No one knew if this really could happen or how to prove it. Yet most reporters of poltergeists didn't involve families with teenage children. And there were 2 teenagers in the Lombardo family. Monday, March 3rd, the parapsychologist said that they would prepare a report on what they had learned. The day after they left, the trouble returned with a vengeance. Tuesday, March 4th, in the afternoon, a bowl of flowers flew off the dining room table and smashed into a cupboard. Then a bottle of bleach jumped out of a cardboard box and popped its top. Then a bookcase filled with encyclopedias fell over and wedged itself between the radiator and wall. Then a flashlight bulb on the table rose up and hit the wall 12 feet away. Finally, 4 knocks were heard coming from the kitchen when nobody was in the room. Wednesday, March 5th, while Mrs. Lombardo was making breakfast, she heard a loud crash from the living room. The coffee table had turned over by itself, but that was the end of it. After a month of chaos, everything returned to normal. In August, the 2 parapsychologists gave their report. They decided that the Lombardos had not made up the story, nor had they imagined it. Their trouble had been real, but what had caused it? They said that no pranks or tricks were involved, nor any magic, as the police had done. They also ruled out vibrations from underground water and other physical cause. The only explanation they could not rule out was the possibility of a teenage poltergeist that had been at work moving objects with mental power. They did not have enough evidence to prove it, but it was the only answer they had. If it was a poltergeist, they thought it was Tom. If they were right, if a normal boy like Tom had become a poltergeist, this also might happen to other teenagers. It might even happen to you. What are we at?
29.
Alright. Shall we read one more or shall we end it? Ooh. There are 4 ghosts, a ghostly monster, and a corpse in this chapter. But these stories about them are funny, not scary. Let's find out. Strangers. A man and a woman happened to sit next to one another on a train. The woman took out a book and began reading. The train stopped at a half a dozen stations, but she never looked up once. The man watched her for a while and then asked, "What are you reading?" "It's a ghost story," she said. "It's very good. Very spooky. Do you believe in ghosts?" he asked. "Yes, I do," she replied. "There are ghosts everywhere." "I don't believe in them," he said. "It's just a lot of superstition. In all my years, I've never seen a ghost, not one." "Haven't you?" the woman said, and vanished. Woo! Spooky. That one went fast. Let's read The Hog. When Arthur and Anne were in high school, they fell in love. They were both big, fat, and jolly, and seemed suited to one another. But as sometimes happens, things didn't work out. Arthur moved away and married someone else, and Anne didn't marry anyone. And not too many years later, she got sick and died. Some said it was from a broken heart. One day, Arthur was driving to a small town not far from where he and Anne had grown up. Soon, he realized that the hog was following him. No matter how fast Arthur drove, the hog stayed right behind him. Each time he looked back, there was the hog. It began to irritate him. Finally, he couldn't stand it any longer. He stopped his car and rapped the hog on its snout good and hard. "Get out of here, you fat, dirty thing," he shouted. To his astonishment, the hog spoke to him, and it was Anne's voice he heard. "It's her ghost," he thought. "She has come back as a hog." "I was doing no harm, Arthur," the hog said. "I was just out for a brisk walk, enjoying myself. How could you strike me after all that we meant to one another?" With that, she turned and trotted away. Oh, stupid. Fuck is that? Well, look at it!
What the? Looks like the aliens from Mars Attacks.
Alright, let's read this one and then end it. My bad. Sorry for the slip. Is something wrong? A car broke down late at night, way out in the country. The driver remembered passing an empty house a few minutes earlier. "I'll stay there," he thought. "At least I'll get